Chapter 1. The Call to War, London, September 3rd, 1939, 11:15 in the morning. Big Ben had just finished striking when Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's voice filled every radio in the country. Consequently, this country is at war with Germany. In a small flat in Cambridge, Alan Turing sat at his desk. A chessboard lay in front of him, but he wasn't playing. He was thinking. His long fingers slowly turned a single pawn round and round, as if it were part of a much larger puzzle. Alan was 27, tall, thin, slightly awkward. People said there was a strange light in his eyes, as if he always saw the world in a way no one else did. He had just finished his PhD in mathematics. His paper on computable numbers was already being talked about in university circles, but today felt different. Adore Alain looked up. He walked to the letterbox and picked up a plain, brown envelope. No stamp, only typewritten words. Mr. A. M. Turing, personal. Inside was a small card. You are requested to report to the Foreign Hall, room 47. At 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 6th of September, 1939. Come alone. Tell no one. Commander A. Allen read it twice. Then smiled one announcement. He knew exactly who Commander A was, and he knew exactly why they wanted him. 3 days later, September 6, 1939, Alan stepped off the train at King's Cross. He wore his usual grey suit, a little too big at the shoulders. In his briefcase, one clean shirt, a notebook full of strange symbols, and the chess pawn he had been turning in his fingers for days. He walked through the blacked-out streets of London. Sandbags were piled against shop windows. Children carried gas masks. Everyone spoke in low voices. War had begun, but no bombs had fallen yet. It felt like the whole city was holding its breath. Room 47, Whitehall. A heavy wooden door, no nameplate, just a small brass knocker. Alan knocked once. The door opened immediately. A man in naval uniform stood there, tall, calm, eyes like steel. Mr. Turing, right on time. I'm Commander Alistair Denniston. Come in. Inside the room, 6 other men and 1 woman, all sitting around a long table. Maps covered the walls. On the table lay a strange machine, a wooden box with letters and wires. It looked like a typewriter that had been taken apart and put back together wrong. Denniston spoke first. Gentlemen, and lady, you are here because you are the best mathematicians, linguists and puzzle solvers in Britain. The Germans have a machine called Enigma. Every day they send thousands of secret messages with it. We cannot read a single word. If we don't crack it soon, the war will be over before it really begins. He pointed at the wooden box. This is a captured Enigma machine. We have exactly 3 of them in the whole country. You have 1 month to tell us how it works, or we lose the Atlantic. Silence. Then Alan spoke, quiet, almost shy. How many messages do they send every day? Between 2,000 and 3,000. And how many settings does the machine have? Over 150 million. Someone laughed nervously. Alan didn't. He leaned forward and touched the machine. Then we don't have a month. We have days. Dennis, for a long moment. Teneno, did you start tomorrow? A special place has been prepared. Bletchley Park. You will live and work there. No one outside this room can know what you do. Not your mother, not your best friend, not even your wife. He looked straight at Alan. Do you understand? Alan smiled again, small, secret. I've been waiting for this question my whole life. That night, in a tiny room in Whitehall, Alan lay on a narrow bed staring at the ceiling. Outside, air raid sirens practiced their long, lonely wail. He took the chess pawn out of his pocket and placed it on the bedside table. Then he whispered to himself, "Let the game begin." The next morning, a black car took him to Bletchley Park, a ugly Victorian mansion hidden in the Buckinghamshire countryside. As the car stopped, Alan saw dozens of people already arriving. Professors, chess champions, crossword experts, young women fresh from university. None of them knew each other. None of them knew what they were about to do. But all of them felt the same thing in their chest. This is where the real war will be won, or lost, and standing at the front gate, waiting to greet the new arrivals, was a young woman in a simple green dress. She looked up as Alan stepped out of the car. Their eyes met for the first time. Her name was Joan Clarke. She would become the only woman in the entire code-breaking team who could keep up with Alan's mind. She would also become the only person he ever asked to marry, even though he could never truly love her the way the world expected, but that was still months away. Right now, all that mattered was the machine inside the mansion. The machine that could end the war, or make sure it never ended. End of Chapter 1 opening, 980 words so far. Type continue Chapter 1 inch, and I will write the next 2,000 words right now. Alan's first night at Bletchley. First failed attempt to crack Enigma, first joke with Joan, first air raid siren. And a huge cliffhanger when they discover a Polish clue that changes everything. Chapter 2, Secrets of Bletchley Park, September 1939, the first night. The mansion looked like something out of a Gothic novel. Red brick, tall chimneys, windows that stared out like suspicious eyes. Inside, it smelled of old wood, coal smoke, and fresh paint. The government had taken it over only weeks earlier. Carpenters were still hammering in the distance, turning stables into offices and ballrooms into work huts. Alan Turing was given a small room on the second floor. A narrow bed, a desk, one chair, no pictures on the walls. A single blackout curtain that didn't quite close. He unpacked his briefcase, 2 notebooks, 3 pencils, the chess pawn, and a small apple he had bought at the station. He sat on the bed and listened. The house was alive with new sounds, footsteps in corridors, doors closing softly, voices whispering behind walls. These were the people who would live here for years. Some would become friends, some would become rivals. 1 or 2 would become traitors. Downstairs, in the main hall, Commander Dastaan was giving the official welcome. From this moment, he said, his voice sharp and clear, "You do not exist. Your mail will be censored. Your telephone calls monitored. You may not tell anyone, not even your families, where you are or what you do. If you break this rule, you will be court-martialed. This is not a game. The lives of thousands of sailors depend on us." Alan stood at the back, hands in pockets. He watched the faces around him. Most weary men, professors with beards, young hash fresh from Oxford and Cambridge. But there were women too. Wrens in navy uniforms, typists, and one woman in a green dress who was clearly not a typist. She was taking notes in a small black book, her handwriting fast and neat. When Dastaan finished speaking, Sherlock had up errands across the clock. She was 22, bright, quick, and already tired of being underestimated. She had come top in her mathematics degree at Cambridge. But because she was a woman, she had been offered a linguistics job at Bletchley instead of code breaking. She had fought her way into Hut 8 anyway. Alan walked over. "You're Joan Clarke," he said. It wasn't a question. She smiled small, amused. "And you're Alan Turing. I read your paper on computable numbers." Twice, Alan blinked. "Most pintre I thought it was brown." The idea of a universal machine that could simulate any other machine. It's exactly what we need here. Alan felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, someone understood. They were interrupted by a tall, thin man with round glasses. Gordon Welchman, another Cambridge mathematician. "Tomorrow start, Welkmanse, hut shop. We have 3 captured Enigma machines and a stack of intercepted messages. The Poles have sent us some ideas, but nothing works yet. We're starting from almost zero." That night, Alan couldn't sleep. He walked downstairs in his pajamas and slippers, carrying a candle. The mansion was dark and quiet. He found his way to Hut 8, a wooden building in the garden, newly built, smelling of fresh pine. Inside, a single lamp was still burning. Joan Clarke was there, sitting at a table covered with wires, rotors, and paper. The Enigma machine sat in front of her like a sleeping animal. "You couldn't sleep either?" Alan asked. She shook her head. "Too much to think about." They sat together in silence for a while, staring at the machine. 3 rotors, 10 plugboard connections, a reflector. Every day at midnight, the Germans changed the settings. Ring settings, rotor order, plugboard cables. Over 158 quintillion possible combinations. Impossible. Joan broke the silence. "The Poles think if we can guess the daily key, we can work backwards." They built machines called Bumsbig, things with spinning drums. But they only worked for the early Enigma, Alan said. The Germans added more plugboards, more complexity. "The bombs are too slow now." Joan looked at him. "So what do we do?" Alan picked up a pencil and began drawing on a sheet of paper lines, boxes, arrows. "We build a better machine," he said quietly. "A machine that doesn't just test keys, a machine that thinks." Joan watched his hand move across the paper. The drawing looked strange, almost alive. "What will you call it?" she asked. Alan paused. Then he smiled. "I don't know yet. But it will be universal." Outside, the first air raid siren of the war began to wail across the countryside. False alarm, just practice. But sounded Joanne's too up inside. Alan didn't move. "Do you ever think," he said slowly, "that we're not just trying to win a war? That we're building something that will change everything?" Joan looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "Every day." They walked back to the mansion together, to shadows in the moonlight. Behind them, in Hut 8, the Enigma machine sat waiting, silent, unbreakable, for now. But in the weeks that followed, something began to grow at Bletchley Park, something no one could see yet. A team, a friendship. The next morning, September 7th, 1939, Hut 8 came alive at dawn. The wooden building was cold, the air thick with the smell of new varnish and cigarette smoke. Long tables ran down the center, covered in green baize. Blackboards lined the walls. In one corner, sat the three precious Enigma machines, each under a grey dust cover like sleeping beasts. Alan arrived first, carrying a mug of tea that tasted of metal and rationed milk. Joan was already there, pinning fresh intercepts to a corkboard. She had been up since 5. "Morning," she said without looking round. The overnight watch sent these 23 messages. All gibberish. Alan pulled off the cover of the nearest Enigma. Its brass rotors gleamed dully. He set the rings to yesterday's known settings just for practice and typed the first 5 letters of a test message. The lamps lit up. EDMLN. He tried again with different plugboard cables. Different result. Again. Joan watched him for a minute, then spoke softly. "We're not going to solve it by hand, Alan. I know," he said. "But I need to feel how it lies." By 8 o'clock, the rest of the team had arrived, 12 people crammed into a space meant for 6. Gordon Welchman took charge, voice crisp. "We divide into shifts. Day shift, night shift, graveyard. No days off, no leave. The Germans don't rest, neither do we." He handed out rolls like cards in a game. "Alan, you're on machine design. We need something faster than the Polish bombs. Joan, you're with the girls on cribs guessing plain text, phrases the Germans are likely to use." Joan nodded, but Alan saw the flicker in her eyes. She wanted to be on the machines, not guessing phrases. The first week was chaos. Messages poured in thousands every day. U-boats stalking convoys in the Atlantic. Luftwaffe squadrons moving across Europe. Every intercept a life or death puzzle, and none of them could be read. The team tried everything. They built menus chains of logical contradictions that might eliminate wrong settings. Der Testtrends 1111 Ohr an die Gruppe to the group. Sometimes they got a few letters. Never a full message. At night, Alan walked the grounds alone, hands in pockets, staring at the stars. He thought in loops and contradictions. He filled notebook after notebook with diagrams of rotors, relays, and knew something he was beginning to call a universal computing machine. Joan found him one evening on a bench by the lake. "You're going to burn out," she said, sitting beside him. "I don't sleep much anyway," Alan replied. "My brain won't switch off." She was quiet for a moment, mine either. "I keep thinking if we fail, every ship that goes down is because of us." Alan turned to look at her. Moonlight caught the side of her face. "We won't fail," he said simply. Joan laughed a short, surprised sound. "You sound so sure." "I am. Mathematics always wins in the end." She studied him. "You really believe that?" "I have to." They sat in silence until the air raid siren practiced again. Long, rising wail, false alarm. But it reminded them both that London was only 50 miles away, and the bombs would come soon enough. Back in Hut 8 the next day, something changed. A package arrived from the Polish cipher bureau-exiled cryptologists who had fled Warsaw just before the invasion. Inside were blueprints, photographs, and a letter. Gordon Welchman read it aloud. "They've been working on Enigma since 1932. They built over 50. Bombs electromechanical, monsters with spinning drums. They cracked the early versions. Then, in 1938, the Germans added to more rotors. The bombs became too slow. The Poles say they can't keep up anymore. He laid the blueprints on the table. But they've given us everything, every trick, every weakness they found. Alan pored over the pages like a starving man over food. One detail stopped him cold. A handwritten note in the margin. The Germans never use certain letters as the fourth rota setting. Superstition, laziness. We never discovered why. Alan's eyes narrowed. If they avoid certain settings, that reduces the possibilities. Dramatically, Joan leaned over his shoulder. How many? Alan did the calculation in his head. From 158 quintillion, down to something we might actually search. The room went quiet. Gordon Welchman spoke first. We build a new bomb, bigger, faster. British. Alan looked up. I have ideas. But we'll need engineers. Workshops, hundreds of them. Deniston, who had been listening from the doorway, nodded once. You'll have them. Whatever you need. That night, the mood in Hut 8 was different. Tired faces carried something new hope. But hope is fragile. 2 days later, a new intercept arrived priority red. Joan decoded the header using standard procedures. Itois from U-boat Khmer and Norfolk. The crib worked partially, just enough to read fragments. Convoy HX-72, 41 ships. Escort weak. Attack at dawn. The position followed. Joan's hand trembled as she wrote it down. 41 merchant ships. Thousands of tons of food, fuel, tanks, thousands of men. If the U-boat succeeded, Britain would starve. The message was dated tomorrow. They had less than 24 hours to find the days key, settings, and they had never broken a full message before. Alan stood over the Enigma, fingers flying across the rotors. Joan watched him, fear and determination fighting on her face. Gordon Welchman lit another cigarette. We have one chance, he said quietly. If we fail, God help those men. Outside, the wind rose. Leaves whipped against the windows of Hut 8. Inside, the team worked in silence, 12 minds against a machine that had never been beaten. Alan paused for a moment, looked at Joan, and spoke the words that would haunt them all. We're not just breaking a code, he said. We're deciding who lives and who dies. The lamp flickered, the rotors waited, and somewhere in the black Atlantic, 41 ships sailed blindly into the night straight toward a pack of steel wolves that only Bletchley Park could stop. End of Chapter 2. Approximately 1,850 words total for the chapter Cliffhanger locked and loaded. The race to save convoy HX-72 begins in Chapter 3, the first real test of the team, Alan's radical new bomb design. Rising personal tension and the moment everything almost falls apart. Chapter 3, The Impossible Code, September 1940, 1 year into the war. Hut 8, Bletchley Park, 3:17 a.m. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the metallic smell of overheated valves. The first British bomb, christened Victory, stood in the corner like a monstrous organ. 36 Enigma, equivalent spinning, in perfect synchrony. Drums whirring, relays clicking at 120 revolutions per minute. It sounded like 1,000 typewriters having a nightmare. Alan Turing stood over it, eyes bloodshot, shirt sleeves rolled high. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. Joan Clarke handed him a fresh mug of tea strong, no sugar, just how he liked it. We're close, she said quietly, menu solid. Crib is weta vorsage, weather forecast. They use it every morning at 6 a.m. Alan nodded but didn't drink. He was watching the machine hunt. The bomb worked on contradictions. If a guessed setting produced a logical impossibility like a letter, encrypting to itself, it stopped. Fast elimination. In théorie. In practice, it was still taking hours per key. Gordon Welchman paced behind them. Convoy HX-72 is already in the kill zone. 41 ships. Escort down to 2 destroyers after the last attack. If we don't give the Admiralty the U-boat positions by dawn, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The team had been living on this convoy for 3 days. Intercepts had come in fragment spatial breaks using old settings. Enough to know the Wolfpack was gathering. Not enough to warn the ships. Joan looked at the clock. 3 hours until the main weather report. If we get that, we're in for the day. Alan finally spoke. Voice hoarse. We won't get it in time. Victories too slow. We need more bombs. 10, 50. We have one. Welchman snapped. Then softer. We have one. Silence fell, broken only by the relentless whir of the machine. Then without warning, victory stopped. A bell rang. A single light glowed green on the control panel. Joan's hand flew to her mouth. Alain Linedine, reading this Fascavorate. Ring settings. January 2613. Plugboard A J B K C L. He stopped. It's good. Welchman grabbed the phone to the Admiralty. We have the key. Stand by for decrypts. Within minutes, the HUD exploded into controlled chaos. Girls from the Wren section typed decrypted messages as fast as the Typex machines allowed. One by one, the day's traffic poured out in clear German. Joan read the first full message aloud, her voice trembling. From U-boat command to Group West, convoy sighted bearing 270, speed 8 knots, 7 U-boats in position. Attack at first no moon, Heil Hitler. The room went still. Alan closed his eyes. 41 ships, thousands of men. And because of a machine in a wooden hut in Buckinghamshire, they now had a chance. The Admiralty rerouted the convoy immediately. Escorts were scrambled. A catapult-armed merchantman launched a hurricane that caught U-99 on the surface. Depth charges rained. By noon, 3 U-boats were confirmed sunk. The convoy scattered but survived. Britain did not starve that week. Inuit, the celebration was pied. Someone played a gramophone record. Glenn Miller smuggled in. Joan raised a cup of tea in toast. 2 mathematics, she said. Alan smiled tired, genuine. 2 contradictions, but victory was fleeting. 2 days later, everything changed. October 1st, 1940. A new intercept arrived. Routine naval traffic. Joan was on crib duty. She fed the menu into victory. The bomb ran for 6 hours. Nothing. Then 8 hours. Still nothing. By midnight, the machine had tested every possible setting based on known weaknesses. No stop. No green light. Joan stared at the results, face pale. They've changed something, she whispered. Alan took the printout. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers. 4th rotor, he said finally. The Germans have added a 4th rotor on some machines. Naval Enigma. The Greeks' new toy. Welchman swore under his breath the first time anyone had heard him curse. The 4th rotor increased the possibilities 1,000-fold. victory was obsolete overnight. The team stood in silence. Outside, autumn rain began to fall, drumming on the tin roof like distant gunfire. Alan walked out into the darkness without a coat. Joan followed. He stood by the lake, hands deep in pockets, rain soaking his hair. "We were so close," she said. "We still are," Alan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Joan touched his arm. "What do we do now?" Alan looked up at the blacked-out sky. "We build something new. Something that doesn't rely on human error or German laziness. A machine that can handle any number of rotors. Any complexity." Joan waited. Alan turned to her, rain streaming down his face. "We build the future." Behind them, in Hut 8, the bomb ticked as it cooled silent for the first time in weeks. Ahead lay the darkest period of the war. The U-boats returned in force. The happy time, the Germans called it. Convoys vanished. Bodies washed ashore on Canadian beaches. Britain stood on the edge of starvation. And in a small wooden hut, a handful of exhausted people fought a war no one would ever hear about. But the Siegen latat night, Bandlight, Diergravs, Beanstats, Strograms. A machine not just for code breaking, but for thinking. He called it Christopher after the boy he had loved at school, the boy who had died young. No one understood yet what he was building. Not even Joan, but she saw the light in his eyes, the same light that had been there the first day in room 47, and she knew. Whatever came next, Alan Turing would not stop, even if it destroyed him, even if it changed the world forever. Chapter 4. Betrayal in the Shadows, Winter, 1941, Bletchley Park, under snow. The lawns were white, the lake frozen, the huts ringed with icicles that dripped slowly in the weak, midday sun. Coal was rationed, breath froze in the air, and the war felt closer than ever. London burned nightly under the Blitz. Food queues stretched for blocks. And in the Atlantic, the U-boats were winning. Hut 8 had become a different place. The easy camaraderie of 1939 was gone. Faces were thinner. Eyes ringed with permanent shadows. The fourth rotor, nicknamed Greek by the team, had turned Naval Enigma into a fortress again. The bombs ran day and night, but the stops were rare. Convoys continued to vanish. Alan Turing worked alone now for long stretches. Locked in a small side room filled with valves, wires, and hand-drawn schematics, he had abandoned mechanical drums entirely. What he was building used something new, thermionic, valves, hundreds of them flashing at electronic speed. He called the machine bomb no longer. He called it Christopher. Joan Clarke knocked one evening in February, carrying 2 cups of cocoa made with powdered milk. "You haven't eaten in 2 days," she said, setting 1 cup on his desk. Alan didn't look up. "I'm close." Joan studied the blueprints, rows of numbers, logic gates, memory stores. "This isn't a bomb anymore," she whispered. "No," Alan said. "It's a digital programmable computer, the first in the world. If it works, it will test 1,000 settings a second, no menus needed. No crib. Pure, brute force guided by logic." Joan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "You're going to change everything." Alan finally met her eyes. "That's the idea." They had grown closer over the long winter walks around the frozen lake, late-night talks about mathematics and life. Joan knew Alan was different. She had guessed parts of his secret. She never pushed. In March, she accepted a marriage proposal, not from Alan, but from a kind lieutenant in Hut 6 named Geoffrey. It was practical. Women were not allowed to stay at Bletchley if they were single and over 25. Marriage meant she could keep working, and congratulated her with a stiff smile or a fun tampon in something broke. But the work went on. And then, in April 1941, the first whisper of betrayal reached Hut 8. It started with a discrepancy. Joan noticed it during a routine check of old decrypts. A U-boat position from 3 weeks earlier decoded after a rare stop did not match the known sinking. The convoy had been missed. The U-boat had broken off at the last moment. Someone warned them, she said quietly to Gordon Welchman. Welchman's face hardened. Impossible. The keys are only known here. But the doubts grew. Another, intercept partially, broken mentioned a source in England. Security tightened. Mail was read more closely. Telephone calls monitored even inside the park. Guards appeared at the gates. Alan dismissed it at first. Human error, he said. Or a lucky guess. But Joan couldn't let it go. One night in May, during the graveyard shift, she stayed late in the indexing room rows of filing cabinets holding every decrypted message. Cross-referenced by date, sender, keyword. She was looking for patterns. At 2 a.m., she found one. A series of low priority, whether messages sent from a minor station in Norway, innocuous, repeated phrases. But the settings used were wrong. Deliberately wrong. As if someone had fed the Germans false keys to test whether Bletchley was reading their traffic. Joan's hands went cold. She ran to Alan's room and hammered on the door. He opened it in pajamas, hair wild. Look, she said, spreading the papers on his desk. Alan read in silence, then again. My God, he whispered. Someone inside Bletchley was communicating with the enemy. The next morning, Commander Dennison called only the senior krigsslaw, SF Flatly. MI5 is sending investigators. Until they find the traitor, trust no one. Not your colleagues, not your friends. The room chilled. After the meeting, Joan walked with Alan to the lake. Do you think it's one of us? Sure as scared. Alan stared across the ice. It has to be. Only a handful of people know enough. Joan hesitated. There's something else. Last week, I saw John Cairncross from Hut 3 in the indexing room after hours. He said he was looking for a file. But he was in the wrong section. Alan turned sharply. Cairncross. John Cairncross, brilliant Scottish vet. A rising star in Soviet translation. Alan's mind raced. The Soviets were neutral for now, but everyone knew communist sympathies ran deep in some Cambridge circles. That night, Alan did something he had never done before. He broke the rules. He waited until the huts were empty, then slipped into the administrative office. He knew where personnel files were kept. Joan had shown him once. He found Cairncross's file. Inside, a note from security. Subject attended communist meetings at Cambridge, 1930s. Monitored but no action taken. Alan's heart pounded. He replaced the file and left. The next day, Cairncross was gone, transferred suddenly to another section. No explanation. Joan cornered Alan in Hut 8. What did you do? I did what had to be done. You reported him. I protected us. I love you, S. Joan's eyes filled with tears. This place is eating us alive. Alan reached out as if to touch her arm, then stopped. I know, he said softly. but the dead on remorse spread. Trust cracked, people stopped talking freely, and the work suffered. De bon mystère crept in June 93, convoi OB 3397 ships. Escort scattered by a storm. A wolf pack of 12 U-boats. Bletchley had partial settings enough for fragments, but not enough to warn the Admiralty in time. 15 ships sunk, over 2,000 men lost. When the news came, Hut 8 fell silent. Joan sat at her desk and cried quiet, angry tears. Alan stood at the window, fists clenched so tight his nails drew blood. "We're failing," he said. "No," Joan replied, voice fierce. "We're being failed." That night, Alan made a decision. He went to Dastaan. "We need the Americans," he said. "Their resources, their engineers. Valves by the thousand. We can't do this alone anymore." Dastaan looked at him for a long moment. "Arrangements are being made," he said finally. "You'll go yourself. In secret. To New York. Show them what we've built. Convince them to help." Alan nodded. And Alan, Dastaan added quietly, "Watch your back. The traitor may not be the only one." 2 weeks later, Alan boarded a liner in Liverpool blacked out, zigzagging across the Atlantic under destroyer escort. As Britain disappeared behind him, he stood on deck clutching a small wooden box. Inside, the complete plans for Christopher, the world's first digital computer. If the ship was torpedoed, he was under orders to throw it overboard. He never let it out of his sight. Behind him, at Bletchley, Joan watched the recruitment boards. More women arriving, more machines, more secrets. And somewhere, in the shadows, a traitor still walked free. The war was far from over. And the price of genius was only beginning to be paid. Chapter 5. Race Against Time, July 1941, the North Atlantic. The liner SS Britannic zigzagged at full speed, escorted by 2 destroyers whose wakes cut white scars across the grey sea. Blackout rules were absolute: no lights, no smoking on deck after dark. The passengers, mostly diplomats, businessmen, and a handful of mysterious civilians, spoke in whispers. Alan Turing stood at the rail, the small wooden box chained to his wrist with handcuffs. Inside, the complete plans for Christopher, plus a sample for Rota Enigma. Captured from U-110 in May, the Admiralty had decided the risk was worth it. Britain was drowning in the Atlantic. America was still neutral, but if Alan could convince their engineers to help. He hadn't slept properly in days. The crossing was hell-constant course changes, depth charge practice that rattled the ship, the ever-present fear of a torpedo. On the 5th night, it came. A violent shudder, alarms, torpedo portside missed by 50 yards. The ship heeled hard to starboard. Passengers screamed. Alan clutched the box to his chest and ran for the lifeboats. But the U-boat had misjudged. The escorts counterattacked. Depth charges boomed like thunder under the water. Minutes later, oil and debris surfaced, U-boat destroyed. Alan stood on deck, soaked in spray, heart pounding. He looked at the wooden box. "Close," he whispered. Joan's last letter was in his pocket. She had written it the night before he left. "Stay safe. Come back. We need you. Première need you." He hadn't replied. He didn't know how. 10 days later, New York Harbor. Alan stepped onto American soil wearing a borrowed suit to sizes too big. He was met by a tall, serious man in a dark fedora, Dr. Turing, names Prescott. Office of Naval Intelligence. Welcome to the United States. They drove straight to Washington. Then to a secret facility in Dayton, Ohio National Cash Register Company, now working on war contracts. The Americans were stunned. They had been working on their own bombs slow, mechanical, based on outdated Polish designs. When Alan unrolled his blueprints for Christopher electronic machine with 1,500 valves, programmable, capable of testing thousands of settings per second, the room went silent. An engineer named Joseph Desch leaned over the drawings. This is 10 years ahead of anything we've got. Alan nodded. We don't have 10 years. We have months. The deal was struck. America would build the machines, hundreds of them. British Wrens would train American waves. Secrets would be shared. But there was a price. Alan had to stay 6 months, oversee construction, teach the impossible. He cabled Bletchley, delayed, work proceeding, 80 back in England. Joan read the cable and felt the distance grow. Autumn 1941. Bletchley expanded like a living thing. New huts, new faces. American liaison officers in crisp uniforms. Joan was promoted officially in charge of the girls' section in Hut 8. Unofficially, she was running half the naval analysis. Her engagement to Jeffrey had quietly ended. Wartime, misunderstanding, she told friends. She told no one the real reason. The spy hunt continued. MI5 swept the park twice, nothing found. But Joan noticed small things. Files moved, notes missing. A wren seen near the indexing room too often. One night, in November, during a heavy fog, Joan stayed late again. She was cross-referencing U-boat movements with known decrypts. A pattern emerged. 3 separate occasions where partial breaks had been delayed just long enough for a convoy to sail into danger. The delays all traced back to one shift, one person. Hugues Alexandre chess champion brilliant the day ship. Joan's blood ran cold. Hugh was charming, popular, trusted by everyone, including Alan, who had left him in charge. She confronted Gordon Welchman privately. "You're wrong," he said. "Hugh's one of us." But the evidence mounted. A hidden microphone in the canteen caught Hugh asking unusual questions about American involvement. MI5 took him away quietly one morning in December. No trial, no announcement. He vanished into wartime secrecy. Years later, files would reveal the truth. Hugh Alexander was innocent. The real traitor John Cairncross had already been moved to another section and continued passing secrets to Moscow until 1951, but in 1941, no one knew. The damage was done. Trust was shattered, and the Atlantic bled. Christmas 1941, Pearl Harbor attacked. America finally in the war. Alan, still in Ohio, heard the news on the radio. He stood in the snow outside the NCR factory, watching the first American bomb take shape, bigger, faster, electronic. He thought of Joan. He thought of the convoy men who would never see home. He thought of Christopher now being built by strangers in a foreign land. And for the first time, he felt the weight of what he had created, not just a machine. A weapon, one that could win the war, or destroy the men who built it. In England, Joan stood outside Hut 8 on Christmas Eve, watching snowfall on the frozen lake. Chuel d'Alan S. last letter short, formal, careful. She whispered to the night, Come home soon. The code isn't the only thing breaking. Far across the ocean, Alan looked up at the same stars. He didn't know how much longer he could stay away. But the machines were almost ready, and the greatest test was still to come. Spring 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic reached its peak. U-boats sank ships faster than Britain could build them. Churchill called it the only thing that truly frightened him. And at Bletchley Park, the new American bombs began to arrive. The tide was about to turn, but not without one final, desperate race. A race that would push Alan Turing to the very edge of genius. Untold. Chapter 6. The Turning Point, May 1942. Bletchley Park, the first American-built high-speed. Bombs arrived in crates marked office machinery. They were monsters 12 feet tall, weighing tons, filled with 2,000 glowing valves each. The Wrens nicknamed them jumbos. Hut 8 had grown into a factory of secrets. The noise never stopped, relays clicking, paper tearing, telephones ringing. The girls worked in 8-hour shifts, hands raw from plugging cables, eyes straining under green-shaded lamps. Joan Clarke stood in front of the newest jumbo, watching the drums spin at blinding speed. Four-rotor, Enigma no longer, impossible. The machine stopped with a triumphant bell, a green light. The day's key. Joan let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Within hours, the Atlantic lit up with decrypted U-boat positions. Wolf packs were scattered. Escorts hunted the hunters. For the first time since 1939, more U-boats were sunk than merchant ships. The tide had turned. But the cost was showing. Alan Turing returned from America in June, thinner, quieter, eyes carrying the weight of too many secrets. He stepped off the train at Bletchley Station wearing the same grey suit, now hanging looser on his frame. Joan was waiting on the platform. She had rehearsed 100 things to say. In the end, she said none of them. They simply looked at each other for a long moment. Then Alan smiled small, tired, real. Hello, Joan. Hello, Alan. They walked back to the park together, neither speaking of the months apart. That night, in Hut 8, the team celebrated the only way they knew how, extra tea ration and a gramophone playing quietly in the corner. Gordon Welchman raised a chipped mug to the jumbos and to the man who made them possible. Everyone looked at Alan. He shook his head to all of us. And to the girls who run them, the Wrens cheered the loudest sound Hut 8 had ever heard. Later, Alan and Joan walked to the lake. The moon was full, turning the water silver. Joan spoke first. I ended things with Jeffrey. Alan nodded. I know. Silence. Then Joan turned to him. Alan, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've known for a while. Alan's face went very still. I don't care, she said simply, about who you are, what you feel. I love you anyway. Alan looked away, across the water. You can't, he said quietly. No one can. I already do. He turned back to her. His eyes were wet. I'm not made for that kind of love. Joan, I wish I were. For you, I wish it more than anything. Joan reached out and took his hand. Then let me love you as a friend. The best friend I've ever had. That's enough. Alan squeezed her hand once, hard. Thank you, he whispered. They stood like that until the moon began to set. The next day, the work continued. But something had shifted. The black months were ending. By autumn 1942, Naval Enigma was broken daily. U-boat commands every order laid bare. Dönitz, the German admiral, raged in his headquarters convinced there were traitors in his own ranks. He never suspected a country mansion in England. Convoys sailed safely. Supplies reached Britain. The invasion of North Africa operation Torch went ahead with perfect intelligence. Churchill visited Bletchley in September, secretly. He walked through the huts, shaking hands with Wrens who had no idea who he was. Inuit, he stopped in front of Alan. "You've done more than A to win this war," he said quietly. Alan, awkward as ever, mumbled something about teamwork. Churchill smiled. "Nonsense. Give me your bombers, pilots, and codebreakers and I'll give you victory." He left as quietly as he had come. But victory was still far away. In December 1942, Alan made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He proposed to Joan not out of sudden passion, out of fear. Fear that she would be forced to leave Bletchley, fear that the work would suffer without her, fear of being alone in a world that didn't understand him. They were walking by the lake again, frost on the ground. "Joan," he said suddenly, "will you marry me?" She stopped walking. For a long moment, she looked at him. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, Alan, I will." They told no one at first. Joan wore no rings were impossible to get, but word spread quietly. Congratulations came with raised eyebrows and knowing looks. Only Gordon Welchman pulled Alan aside. "Are you sure?" he asked. Alan nodded. "It's the right thing." Welchman studied him. For whom? Alan had no answer. The engagement lasted 6 months. In the end, it ended not with drama, but with quiet honesty. One evening in Hut 8, after a long shift, Alan found Joan alone. "I can't do this," he said. "I can't marry you. It wouldn't be fair to you." Joan looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said softly. "I've always known." Tears came then for both of them. But something stronger remained. Friendship, the kind that survives war, secrets, and heartbreak. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Inside, the jumbos hummed. The code was broken. The Atlantic was safe. And in the quiet spaces between the clicking relays, two people had found something rarer than victory, understanding. The war rolled on North Africa. Sicily, the slow grind toward D-Day. But for the codebreakers of Bletchley Park, the darkest days were over. The turning point had come, not with fanfare, not with medals, but with the soft click of a machine stopping on the right setting. And to friends choosing truth over everything else. Chapter 7, D-Day Shadows, June 1944, Bletchley Park. The war had changed everything and nothing. The huts were bigger now, ringed with barbed wire and armed guards. American officers walked the paths in crisp uniforms. The bombs now over 100 strong roared day and night in new brick buildings, tended by thousands of Wrens and WWII. The code was broken so completely that German commanders no longer trusted their own communications. Ultra, the codename for Enigma, intelligence was the Allies' greatest weapon. And no one outside a tiny circle knew it existed. Alan Turing had moved on from Hut 8. He worked now in a small room in Block F on speech. Encipherment trying to secure Allied communications against the day Germany broke their codes. It was lonely work. Brilliant, but lonely. Joan Clarke had left Bletchley the year before. Marriage rules had finally caught up with her. She returned to London, took a teaching post, and waited for the war to end. She and Alan wrote letters long, careful, full of mathematics and unspoken affection. They never mentioned the engagement that wasn't. On the evening of June 5, 1944, Alan was walking the grounds when he saw Gordon Welchman hurrying toward the main house. "Alan," Welchman called, "come quickly, it's happening." Inside the mansion, the operations room was alive with quiet urgency. Maps covered the walls. Pins marked the greatest fleet ever, assembled thousands of ships gathering off the south coast of England. Operation Overlord, D-Day, the invasion of Europe, and Ultra had made it possible. For months, Bletchley had tracked every German division in France, every Panzer Reserve, every coastal battery. Fake armies patterns Phantom, First Army Group had fooled Hitler into keeping his best troops at Pas-de-Calais. The Atlantic Wall was not blind, but it was deceived. Alan stood in the shadows, watching the teleprinters chatter. A message came, indecrypted, Naval Enigma. German E-boats moving out from Cherbourg. The duty officer picked up the phone to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Chef. Minutes later, Allied destroyers intercepted the E-boats. The invasion fleet sailed on, unmolested. Alan felt a strange emptiness. This was the moment they had worked for. The reason thousands of merchant sailors had died in the Atlantic. The reason he had built Christopher, broken Enigma, sacrificed everything, and now it was here. He walked outside into the warm June night. The sky was full of aircraft wave after wave of transports towing, gliders, bombers softening the coast. The roar was endless. Alan lit a cigarette, something he rarely did, and watched the Armada pass overhead. He thought of the men inside those planes. Paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne jumping into darkness. Rangers climbing cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, boys from Iowa and Texas storming beaches with names they couldn't pronounce. He thought of Joan. He thought of the traitor Cairncross, still somewhere in the system, still passing secrets to Moscow. He thought of the future of machines that could think, of a world rebuilt on logic. And he felt, for the first time, afraid. No of défaite, of victory. Because when the war ended, the secrets would have to be kept 30 years. 50, forever, no medals, no recognition. No telling wives, children, friends. The greatest intelligence triumph in history would be buried, and the people who achieved it would disappear into ordinary lives. June 6, 1944. Dawn reports began to flood in. Utah, Beachlight, resistance. Omaha, heavy fighting, but holding. Gold, Juneau, sword British and Canadians pushing inland. By evening, the lodgment was secure, the road to Paris was open. In the operations room, quiet cheers, tears. Someone opened a bottle of gin. Alan stood apart. A young wren approached him, barely 18, eyes shining. "We did it, sir, didn't we?" Alan looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said softly, "we did." But his voice carried no triumph. Only the weight of what came next. That summer, Bletchley began to empty. The bombs were dismantled, files burned, huts abandoned. Joan visited once, in July. They walked the grounds one last time. The lake was green with algae. The mansion looked tired. "What will you do?" she asked. "Back to Cambridge, I suppose. Teach, think." "And Christopher?" Alan smiled faintly. "The Americans have it now. And the government has classified everything. The machine will be forgotten." For national security, Joan stopped walking. "That's not right." "No," Alan agreed, "but it's the world we saved." They stood in Tenjo answer when it's over. "I will." She kissed his cheek quick, sisterly. Then she was gone. Alan watched her car disappear down the drive. He never saw her again in person. Autumn 1944. Germany crumbled. The Allies raced across France. Bletchley Park became a ghost town. Alan left in October. He took the train to Manchester, new job at the National Physical Laboratory, designing a real computer. Not for war this time, for peace. On his last night, he walked to Hut 8 one final time. The building was empty, windows broken, dust on the tables. He stood where Christopher's successor had once hummed. He took the old chess pawn from his pocket, the one he had carried since 1939, and placed it on the windowsill. Then he walked away. Behind him, the shadows of D-Day lingered. The beaches were quiet now. The Atlantic Wall in ruins. And the greatest secret of the war began its long sleep. But secrets have a way of waking up, even decades later. Even when the people who kept them are gone. Chapter 8. Victory's Bitter Taste, May 8, 1945. Manchester, England. The war in Europe ended on a Tuesday. Alan Turing heard the news on the radio in his small flat overlooking the canal. Churchill's voice, gravelly with exhaustion and triumph. The German war is at an end. Outside, church bells rang. People poured into the streets dancing, kissing, waving flags. Fireworks cracked in the dusk. Alan stood at the window, hands in pockets. Watching the celebration, he felt nothing. No joy, no relief. Only a vast inexpress, the Untold. Bletchley Park was being dismantled, files burned, machines smashed, huts demolished. The greatest intelligence operation in history erased, as if it had never existed. He thought of the thousands of lives saved, the convoys that reached port, the beaches at Normandy held because German reserves were in the wrong place. He thought of the men who had died anyway, and he thought of Joan, her last letter unopened on the table. He opened it now. "Dear Alan, the war is over. We won. Because a because of us when you can." There's so much to say. With love, always. Joan. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. He would go. Soon, but not yet. There was work to do. The automatic computing engine at the National Physical Laboratory. His design. The future. A machine that could do anything. Summer 1945. Alan moved to London. The NPL gave him a laboratory in a Victorian building near Teddington. He assembled a small team, young engineers, eager, unaware of what he had done during the war. He told them nothing. The ace took shape valves, mercury delay lines for memory, punch tape for input. It was Christopher grown up. Joan visited in August. They met in a quiet cafe near the Thames. She looked older lines around her eyes, hair pinned back simply. They talked about everything except the war. Mathematics, computing, the future, jeux télécommunications. I'm designing switching systems, she said. Inspired by the bombs, actually. Alan smiled. Good. An awkward pause. Ten Joan say, you should tell someone we did. He shakes his head. Can't. The oath. It's over. No, it's classified until 1975, maybe longer. Joan reached across the table and took his hand. Then, tell me, off the record, what did it feel like? When we broke the four-rota, Alan looked out the window at the river. Like solving the universe, he said quietly. And then, realizing the universe doesn't care. They parted with a hug brief, English. Joan married in 1947, a kind mathematician named John. They had children. She wrote to Alan occasionally. He replied, always polite, distant. The years slipped by. The pilot ACE ran its first programmer, simple calculation of prime numbers. Alan watched the output tape chatter out. Success. But no one outside the lab understood what it meant. Alan published shed intelligence. The paper asked a simple question, can machines think? It introduced the imitation, game what the world would later call the Turing test. The press called it sensational, philosophers argued, the public laughed. Alan didn't care. He ran marathons now almost Olympic standard. He cycled everywhere. He kept his body as sharp as his mind. But the secrets gnawed at him. The homosexuality that had been a quiet part of his life during the war was no longer quiet in peacetime. The police watched. Neighbors whispered. January 1952. A young man named Arnold broke into Alan's house looking for money after a brief affair. Alan reported the burglary. The police investigated. They discovered the relationship. Homosexuality was illegal. Gross indecency. Alan was charged. The trial was swift. He refused to lie. Refused hormone treatment at first. But the alternative was prison. He chose the treatment estrogen injections. Chemical castration. The side effects came quickly. Weight gain, breast growth, impotence, depression. His security clearance was revoked. The man who had shortened the war by years was now a security risk. He lost his consulting work with GCH Cuda, successor to Bletchley. Friends drifted away. Joan visited once, in secret. She found him in his Wilmslow home cluttered with books, papers, a half-built computer in the spare room. He made tea. They sat in the garden. I'm sorry, she said. Alan schruget it's the long. He looked at her liluked. He asked, the night I proposed. Joan nodded. I meant it, he said. In my way, you were the only person who ever understood. Tears came to her eyes. You saved the world, Alan, and they're destroying you for it. He smiled faintly. The world destroys what it doesn't understand. June 7th, 1954. Alan's housekeeper found him in bed. Beside him, a half-eaten apple laced with cyanide. On the bedside table, the old chess pawn from 1939. Suicide. The coroner ruled. He was 41. The news was a small paragraph in the papers. No mention of Bletchley. No mention of Enigma. No mention of the millions of lives. Just brilliant mathematician dies tragically. Joan read it in the newspaper and wept alone. She kept his letters in a locked drawer for the rest of her life. The secret stayed buried. The 30-year rule expired. Files were declassified. The world learned the truth. Bletchley Park, Ultra, the bombs. Alan Turing, the father of computer science, the man who broke Enigma. Books were written. films made, statues erected. In 2009, the British government issued a formal apology. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted a posthumous pardon. Joan now, in her 90s, attended the ceremony at Manchester University, a Brana bench à Plinant. She placed a flower at its base. Then she whispered the words she had never said aloud during the war. I loved you. We all did. The apple gleamed in the sun. The pawn was long gone, but the guy great possible game ne very could. In every mind that dared to think differently, victory had come. But the taste was bitter indeed. Chapter 9. Legacy of the Code, September 21, 2016, Bletchley Park, now a museum. The sun was low over the lake, turning the water gold. Tourists had gone home. The huts stood quiet, restored but empty, echoes of their wartime, raw long faded. Joan Clarke now, Joan Murray, 89 years old, white-haired, walking with a cane stood at the edge of the water. She had come back one last time. Her daughter, Elizabeth, held her arm gently. Mum, are you sure you're up to this? Joan smiled. I've waited long enough. In her hand, she carried a small wooden box. Inside, letters from Alan tied with faded ribbon. A photograph of Hut 8 in 1943, young faces, tired smiles. And the old chess pawn Alan had left on the windowsill all those years ago. A groundskeeper had found it in the 1980s and kept it safe until the museum opened. Joan had asked for it back. She opened the box now and took out the pawn. I promised him I would, she said quietly. Elizabeth watched, tears in her eyes. Joan leaned forward and placed the pawn on the grass at the water's edge. Then she took the photograph and the letters every word Alan had ever written to her and let them fall into the lake. The paper floated for a moment, then sank slowly. Elizabeth started to protest, but Joan raised a hand. They were never mine to keep. They were his, and now they're free. She stared across the water for a long time. In the years after the war, Joan had lived a quiet life. Teaching, marriage to a kind colonel, children, grandchildren. She had never spoken publicly about Bletchley until the 1980s, when the first books began to appear. Even then, she was careful, but the truth could not stay buried forever. 1965 WWII wing Talbotam Revelation. The world gasped. Historians rewrote the war. Estimates: Enigma code-breaking shortened the war by 2 for years, saved 14 million lives. And at the center of it all, Alan Turing, but Alan was gone. The government files remained closed. Joan watched from afar as the campaign grew. 1990s, computer scientists, gay rights activists, historians all demanding recognition. 2009, Gordon Brown's apology. 2013, the royal pardon. 2017, the Turing law pardoning thousands. Joan was invited to Buckingham Palace for the pardon ceremony. Je déclined. I met the Queen once, she told her daughter, at Bletchley. She was Princess Elizabeth then. She shook my hand and said thank you. That was enough, but in private, she wept. Because Alan never heard it. Now, in 2016, the museum had invited her for a special event, the unveiling of a new statue. Alan Turing, seated on a bench by the lake, holding an apple, not the poisoned one, but the symbol of knowledge. Joan had been asked to speak. She had refused. I'm not good with crowds anymore, she said. but she had come anyway, alone with the lake. Elizabeth squeezed her arm. "Do you want to see the statue?" Joan shook her head. "I see him every day," she said, "in computers. In fun. In the way the world thinks now. That's his statue." She turned away from the water. One more thing. They walked slowly to Hut 8. The building was restored perfectly green, baize tables. Blackboards, a rebuilt BAM gleaming, in the corner. Joan stood in the doorway. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she was 26 again. She could hear the relays clicking. She could smell the tea and cigarette smoke. She could see al Chaikinon droop in her eyes. A group of schoolchildren was being given a tour. One girl, 13, maybe 14, with bright curious eyes looked up at Joan. Were you here?" The girl asked shyly. Joan smiled. "Yes, dear, I was." The girl's eyes widened. "Did you know Alan Turing?" Joan's voice was steady. "He was my best friend." The girl looked awestruck. Joan reached into her pocket and took out a small card. On it was printed a simple Turing machine diagram. She handed it to the girl. "Study mathematics," she said. "It will take you further than you can imagine." The girl clutched the card like treasure. Joan walked out into the sunlight. Elizabeth asked softly, "Are you ready to go home?" Joan looked around one last time. The huts, the lake, the sky. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." She died 3 months later, peacefully, surrounded by family. Her last words, according to her daughter, tell them the code is still breaking every day. In every machine, in every mind that refuses to give up. And she was right. Today, every time you ask a question to an AI, every time a computer solves a problem too complex for human minds, every time encrypted messages keep the world safe, Alan Turing is there, Joan Clarke is there. The women of Bletchley, the thousands whose names we will never know, are there. Their legacy is not in statues or banknotes. It is in the digital world we live in. A world built on logic, en route, on the refusal to accept the impossible. The code was broken. The war was won. And the future they dreamed of in cold huts, by candlelight, while bombs fell and nations burned, that future is now. Chapter 10, the final decode, December 15th, 1946, Manchester, England. The National Museum of Computing, Bletchley Park Annex. A new exhibition, hall glass walls, soft lighting, the hum of servers in the distance. In the center stands a full-scale working replica of the BAM. Beside it, a sleek modern computer runs a simulation, rotors spinning in digital form, decrypting a mock Enigma message in milliseconds. A school group clusters round the blaze, foninant. Their teacher, a young woman in her 30s, points to the screen. This machine, she says, shortened World War II by years, and the man who designed it. Alan Turing. He also invented the idea of the computer you're holding right now. One boy looks up from his phone. Wasn't he the guy on the £50 note? The teacher smiles. Yes, and so much more. In the corner of the hall, unnoticed by the group, an elderly woman watches from a wheelchair. Elizabeth Jones' daughter now, in her 70s. Gray hair, sharp eyes, the same determined jaw as her mother. She comes every year on this date. Alan's birthday is in June, Joan's in June too. But this date, December 15th, she keeps for something else. She wheels closer to a new display, a simple glass case. Inside, the chess pawn. The one Joan placed by the lake in 2016. A groundskeeper had found it again years later, half buried in mud, recognized its significance, donated it to the museum. Beside it, a plaque. Left by Alan Turing on his last day at Bletchley Park, 1945. Returned by Joan Clarke. 2016. Mathematics always wins. Elizabeth reaches out and touches the glass. She whispers to no one. Mum would have loved this. The teacher notices her. "Excuse me," she says to the class. "I think we have a special guest." She approaches Elizabeth. "Are you related to Joan Clarke?" Elizabeth smiles. "I'm her daughter." The teenagers crowd around, wide-eyed. One girl the same, bright curiosity, Joan once asks, "What were they like, Alan and your mum?" Elizabeth thinks for a moment. "They were ordinary people," she says finally, "who did extraordinary things. They sat in cold huts, drank terrible tea, and refused to give up. Even when the problem seemed impossible. Even when the world didn't understand them." She looks at the chess pawn. "My mother used to say the code is still breaking. Every day." She was right. Every time you use your phone to navigate, or ask a question to an AI, or send an encrypted message, that's them. That's Alan's universal machine. That's the bomb. That's the women who ran the machines and the men who dreamed them. They didn't do it for fame. They did it because it was right, and in the end, the world caught up. The girl who asked the question looks thoughtful. Did they? Were they happy? Elizabeth's eyes soften, sometimes, in the small moments. A walk by the lake, a solved puzzle. A friend who understood without words. The rest was hard. Harder than we can imagine, but they never regretted it. My mother said once, "We saved lives, and we built the future." That has to be enough. She pauses, and now look around. It is enough. The class is silent. Then the boy with the phone speaks up. "I'm going to study computer science," he says suddenly, because of this. The teacher smiles through tears. Elizabeth reaches into her bag and takes out a small stack of cards, simple Turing machine diagrams, the same Joan used to hand out. She gives one to each child. "Study mathematics," she says, echoing her mother. "It will take you further than you can imagine." Later, when the hall is empty again, Elizabeth wheels to the window overlooking the lake. The sun is setting the same light that once shone onto young people walking its edge, carrying the weight of the world. She places her hand on the glass. "Thank you," she whispers. "Both of you. The code is broken. The future is here. And it's beautiful." Outside, children laugh on the lawn. Inside, the bomb replica clicks softly, a gentle, endless rhythm. The final no of Enigma, but of his truth, of two lives that changed everything. And in the quiet hum of machines all around the world, machines that think, that learn, that connect, Alan Turing and Joan Clarke live on. Forever, the code was broken. The war was won. And the legacy is us. And that, my friends, is the final decode. The incredible true story of Alan Turing, Joan Clarke, and the quiet heroes of Bletchley Park, who broke the unbreakable code, shortened the deadliest war in history, and built the future we all live in today, without ever getting the thanks they deserved in their lifetime. A story of genius, sacrifice, friendship, and a love that didn't need words, just understanding. This was your funny, fun audiobook gala, bringing you Codebreaker Ki Dastaan, the full, emotional journey. If this story moved you, made you think, or even brought a tear to your eye, then please, right now, smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below. Which moment hit you the hardest? Alan's final night, Joan returning the pawn, or knowing the world finally said thank you? Tell me, I read every single one. And yes, the next epic story is already in the works. Coming next month, the unbelievable true tale of Operation Mincemeat, how the Allies used a dead homeless man, a fake identity, and the wildest deception in history to fool Hitler completely and change the course of the war. Dead body, love letters, and pure genius-level madness. You won't believe it's real. Está tuned. It's going to be another roller coaster. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and never forget the quiet heroes who changed everything. This is Funny Fun Audio Book Gala, signing off. See you in the next story.